Folks in Dodge City saw the judge's young wife running barefoot at dawn, and the whole town froze. Catherine Mercer never ran. She moved like someone always waiting for permission. But that morning her nightdress was torn, her hair wild, and fear clung to her face like dust on a trail horse. She crossed Front Street fast, stumbled once, then sprinted toward the tall summer grass that stretched in the direction of the Boone Ranch. A woman only runs like that when she's running from something she cannot fight. Catherine Mercer, 22, pretty and quiet, always wearing long sleeves even when the heat shimmered off the roofs, married to Judge Nathaniel Mercer, a 55-year-old man who talked about justice like he owned it. But the man she ran toward was not a man folks trusted. Elias Boone, 48, a rancher who lived alone on a stretch of sunburned Kansas prairie. Tall, rough-handed, and silent as river rock. He came into Dodge City a few times a month for supplies and left before anyone could start a conversation. People swore they heard strange cries coming from his land long after dark. Months earlier, Catherine had crossed paths with Elias on the trail when her horse went lame near his land. He did not say much, just knelt in the dust, fixed the shoe with quiet patience, and stepped back like a man who expected nothing in return. His hands had been gentle, and his eyes had been kind. She never forgot that. So when the judge's wife disappeared in the direction of his ranch, the whole town whispered the same thing at once. Something wicked was waiting to happen. The judge stormed out by noon, red-faced and furious, shouting that Elias Boone had taken her against her will, taken her because he was exactly the kind of man capable of something terrible. And the town believed him without hesitation. Riders saddled up fast. Men gathered rifles, muttered prayers, and followed the trail leading toward Boone Ranch. But behind all the anger and noise there was a detail none of them could shake. Every single person who saw Catherine Mercer at dawn watched her run toward Elias Boone. Not away. Toward. She did not scream his name. She did not fall or crawl or beg for help. She chose that direction. She chose that ranch. And as the riders disappeared into the summer heat, the people left behind stood in silence, turning that fact over in their minds like a stone they could not ignore. Because if she was truly running for her life, why would she run straight into the arms of a man the whole town feared? By mid-morning, Dodge City felt like a hornet's nest someone had kicked open. Word spread that Catherine Mercer was still missing, and Judge Mercer wasted no time pointing his finger at the only man the town already feared. He stood on the courthouse steps shouting that Elias Boone had stolen his wife. Men gathered fast because fear travels quicker than truth. Nobody asked why Catherine had run toward his ranch. They just accepted the judge's anger as gospel. Tracks were found near the river. Hoof marks pressed deep in the mud. A torn piece of Catherine's blue dress snagged on a branch. To the riders, that was proof enough. They headed toward Boone Ranch with rifles loaded and nerves tight. When they reached the ranch, the yard was quiet, too quiet. The men moved slow, spooked by their own imaginations. Fear makes every noise louder. They kicked the barn door open and sunlight spilled over the scene inside. Catherine lay on an old cot, her skin slick with sweat and a bloody bandage pressed to her side. The gash was deep, the kind that came from falling hard against the iron gate when she tried to escape the judge the night before. Her wrist bore fresh rope burns, red and raw against her pale skin. A wooden table near the door had been knocked on its side, tools and rags scattered across the dirt floor like the aftermath of a struggle. She had run as soon as the sky began to pale, knowing dawn was the only moment he ever slept deeply. She knew she could not go to the town doctor. If she did, they would send her straight back to the judge, so she ran toward the only man who had ever shown her kindness without wanting anything in return. Elias Boone stood between her and the door, a knife in his hand and a strip of torn linen in the other. A small fire glowing in the corner. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, a fresh scratch visible on his forearm. To the men standing in that doorway, the scene told a story they had already decided to believe. The riders did not stop to ask questions. They tackled him, dragged him out into the dust, and tied his hands behind his back. Before they shoved him toward a horse, Elias managed one sentence, low and steady. I did not take her. She ran here on her own. No one listened. Fear was louder than his voice that day. To them, the scene was clear. The judge's wife was hurt. The rancher was standing over her with a blade. The truth did not matter. What mattered was that they believed they had caught a monster. Catherine was carried back to town half conscious and trembling. Elias was thrown into a cell behind the courthouse. People crowded outside the small barred window just to catch a glimpse of him. They whispered every terrible thing they could imagine, convinced they had finally trapped a monster. No one stopped to ask how a man so feared had never harmed a soul before. But something strange happened that afternoon. As Catherine lay in the doctor's office fighting a fever, she kept repeating one thing under her breath. Not Elias, not him. Over and over, like a warning no one bothered to understand. And if they had listened closer, they might have heard the part that truly should have terrified them. She kept whispering that the man they should fear was still out there. So who was she talking about? Catherine Mercer woke sometime near sunset, and the whole doctor's office shifted when she opened her eyes. She flinched so hard the doctor set his tools down and stepped between them. Judge Mercer told the room that his wife was confused, shaken. Not to be trusted in her condition, but her eyes said something different. They said fear. They said history. They said pain that did not start yesterday. The doctor, an old man who had delivered half the county, noticed the marks first. Bruises on her ribs, old ones layered under fresh ones. Marks on her wrists that were not from Elias Boone's cloth, but from rope worn down over time. Fading yellow bruises shaped like fingers on her upper arms. He had seen that pattern before. They did not come from a rancher treating a wound. They came from a husband who wanted control. That evening he stepped out onto the boardwalk and spoke quietly to two men that the town trusted most, the pastor and the owner of the general store. He simply told them what he had seen on Catherine's skin, old bruises, now layered bruises, now the kind that do not come from one wild night at a ranch, the kind that come from a home that is not safe. Across the street, an old widow who lived opposite the judge's house added her own quiet fuel to their doubt. She told the pastor she had heard shouting from that fine white porch more than once. She had seen Catherine on her knees in the yard, one hand clutching her side like something inside had cracked. No one had listened to her before. They were starting to listen now. Catherine tried to sit up, and the first words out of her mouth were soft but sharp. Not Elias, not him. She repeated it over and over until the doctor finally leaned close and asked her who had hurt her. Her answer shook him so badly he dropped his glasses. She whispered the judge's name, not in panic, but in exhaustion, like someone who'd carried a truth for far too long. The doctor's eyes moved to her wrist, the rope burns still angry and red. And these marks, he asked gently. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. The fever came fast. I tied myself to a post outside his barn so I would not wander into the prairie and die. He cut me free, carried me inside, and when the fever made me thrash, I knocked the table over and scratched his arm. He saved me, Catherine said again, her eyes filling with tears, and they will hang him for it. And they said he had done unspeakable things because they needed a villain strong enough to carry their fear. Some even claimed they could picture it clear as day. Catherine forced over a rough table in his barn, rope burns on her wrists, his hands holding her down while she fought to break free. They said the scratch on his arm was proof she had tried to escape. Truth never stood a chance against a good rumor. Inside the cell behind the courthouse, Elias Boone sat silent, staring at the dirt floor like a man who knew no one believed him. And the more Catherine begged them to listen, the more they dismissed her words as the rambling of a frightened girl. But she was not rambling. She was warning them. Because the man she feared most was still free and still close. If you are following this story, make sure you stay with it and consider subscribing so you do not miss the rest. And while you are here, pour yourself a warm cup of tea and settle in. Tell me what time it is for you right now and where you are listening from. By the time the sun climbed over Dodge City the next morning, folks were already gathered in the square for what they called a hearing. It was a show built out of fear and gossip, with Elias Boone tied to a post like a trophy in the center of it. And yet, here and there in the crowd, a few men shifted on their feet. They had heard what the doctor said the night before. Doubt had started to creep in, even if no one dared speak it out loud. Judge Mercer walked out of the courthouse wearing his finest coat, pretending to limp like a wounded hero. The crowd murmured and nodded, ready to believe every word before he spoke a single sentence. He pointed at Elias and claimed his wife had been kidnapped, beaten, and nearly killed. He said Elias was a savage and always had been. "Look at her wrist," the judge shouted, his voice trembling with false grief. "Rope burns, and the scratch on that monster's arm proves she fought back." People clapped like they were in church. Not a soul asked why Catherine had run to that ranch in the first place. Elias stood still, shoulders square, eyes steady. I did not lay a hand on her. "I would rather hang than hurt that girl." Then he went quiet again, like a man who had already lived through worse than the opinions of a crowd. The doctor tried to speak on his behalf. He said Catherine's wounds were old and layered, not the work of one night. He said the girl needed rest, not a circus, but the judge shut him down with one look, and the crowd, hungry for a villain, shut their ears just as fast. Then something unexpected happened. The doctor's apprentice,